While each generation searches for effective ways to be light, the current church is in a dark night of the soul. This Christmas, let's embrace rather than ignore our difficulties and find new ways of reaching out in the darkness. Join Sycamore Creek for a 5-week series, Illumination, exploring a contemplative spirituality from the mystics, saints, and martyrs. You'll discover ways of celebrating Jesus' birth that result in a life of light.
Several years ago during COVID, my wife and I participated in a Black Lives Matter accountability training. It was helping white allies basically create structures for holding each other accountable to doing the work of allyship. And we signed up, and I don't know about you, but when I think about showing up for something like this, you think, like, what are they going to teach you in the first session? And what they taught me completely surprised me. They began with, in session one for white people holding themselves accountable to Black allyship was to love yourself. Did you catch that? Love yourself. You see, you can't help someone be liberated in love if you don't know what it's like to be liberated in love first. If you don't ground yourself in love and the work of advocacy, then you're not going to know how to love to help others. You're going to end up harming someone else. What we all need to learn today is that we have to come home to love. How do you love yourself first? We have to know deep down, deep down in that place, that center place of your very being, your very soul, that you are unconditionally loved by your Creator. You come home to the light of love in your soul. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He also said, you are the light of the world. Let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. How do we let the light of love illuminate ourselves and others around us on this darkest season of the year? The winter solstice is coming up. It's the darkest night of the year on December 21st. We're going to explore that today as we continue a series called Illumination. It's part of a long experiment that we're doing for 18 months, exploring Jesus' most well-known teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. And we're spending time, it's a series of series, where we're exploring the themes in the Sermon on the Mount. And this month, this December, at this winter solstice, we're looking at the theme of light. We're helped along in this by Elaine Heath, who is a writer, a pastor. She was the dean at Duke Divinity School for a season. She's written many books, but one of them is called The Mystic Way of Evangelism. Heath says, evangelism, rightly understood, is the holistic initiation of people into the reign of God that has been revealed in Jesus Christ. Now that's a lot, so let's boil it down just a little bit more. True evangelism guides us all to fully live God's reign as Jesus did. As we lead up to Christmas, we're taking a look at some of the historical figures, the spiritual mystics, you might even call them the spiritual giants of the Christian faith throughout the centuries, to help us learn how to embrace this light, to illuminate our world, to be the light, as Jesus said. Today, here's what we're illuminating. Coming home to the love of God and knowing that you are loved unconditionally will change the world. This isn't just an individual coming home, it's a communal thing. As Heath says, the proper context for evangelism is authentic Christian community, where the expression of loving community is the greatest apologetic for the gospel. In this series, we're looking to the community, the mystics, the ones who could point us to this light. But mysticism isn't just a solitary thing. It's not just like these individual giants who only a few people can have these sorts of experiences. Evelyn Underhill, a 20th century Christian pacifist, author, and mystic, claimed that these sorts of experiences were possible for everyone, not just the few. She says the mystic's inward transformation resulted in an outward life of extraordinary impact on the world. In other words, mysticism equals holy transformation by God, and holy transformation of God's people leads to holy mission impact in the world. When we come home to love, our lives are changed. And when our lives are changed, the world is changed. Let's stop for just a minute, give you a chance to catch your breath and reflect together. Here's a chat question. Where have you seen some positive transformation in your life positively impact the lives of those around you? Let's talk about it. Today I want to tell you about Thomas R. Kelly, not to be confused with R. Kelly, the R&B singer. Thomas R. Kelly was born in Southwest Ohio in 1893. He was born to a devout evangelical Quaker family. The Quakers are sometimes called the Society of Friends. You might wonder, where did they get the name Quaker from? Well, it's because they were known for quaking in the presence of God. Their whole bodies would shake. It was sort of like they were the original Pentecostals. But they don't really do this anymore. Quakers are also known for being pacifists. Some famous Quakers include William Penn, Thomas Paine, Richard Nixon, and Judi Dench. Kelly had an ambition for academic and intellectual achievement and recognition. He started out his studies in chemistry and then moved to philosophy before finally landing at divinity at Haverford College. His graduate studies were interrupted by World War I, and because he was a Quaker pacifist, he joined the YMCA at a post in England, and his job was to inspect German POW camps. He was sent home because he was considered to be too nice, too kind, too friendly, building friendships with the German POWs. He didn't have enough patriotism. Eventually, he got his PhD at Hartford University. When he was standing for his oral examination, he had a stress-induced mental breakdown, and he lost the ability to talk. But his PhD committee showed him some grace and mercy and allowed him a second chance to defend his thesis. Remember, Thomas Kelly had an ambition for intellectual and academic achievement and recognition. And so, as one does, one PhD wasn't enough. He wanted a second one from Harvard University. Now, Harvard wouldn't let him sit for a second PhD because he already had one PhD in philosophy. One is enough. Through all of this, Kelly was prone to depression and headaches and fatigue, and long bouts of being able to work or function effectively. He had moments where his mind went blank, where he lost muscle coordination, and it was basically just a sitting mess of confusion. Don't forget, Thomas Kelly had an ambition for academic and intellectual achievement and recognition. And so he went off to teach at several universities. He taught at Earlham. He taught at University of Hawaii. But he got frustrated at all of these universities because they lacked academic recognition and achievement. They lacked high standards. And so he ended up back at his alma mater, Haverford. Now, if you're not familiar with Haverford, it's not Harvard, although that and many of the schools he taught at started with an H. But Haverford is also an East Coast, intellectually rigorous, well-known, strong reputation school. While teaching at Haverford, he was given a chance at Harvard to sit for a second PhD in philosophy. But right before he was going to go and defend his thesis, he had another one of his breakdowns and he couldn't talk. But unlike the grace and mercy that he was shown the first time, he was shown no grace and mercy at Harvard. They didn't give him a second chance. And he went back embarrassed, feeling like he didn't measure up. Kelly hoped for illumination through academic and intellectual achievement. But what he got instead was a deep depression from chasing after this sort of achievement and recognition. He ended up instead at a lowest point of depression, with academic and intellectual embarrassment. Now, I know something of this feeling. I have a lot of similarities with Kelly, which is probably why I've read a fair amount of him. Because when I was at Duke Divinity School, I felt the same sort of pressure. I felt like I had to achieve, I had to get A after A after A. I had to not only get an A, but I had to get 100%. And just like Kelly, it drove me into kind of a anxious depression as well. Your ambition may not be academic and intellectual, but you probably have some sort of ambition in life to climb the corporate ladder, to have the perfect home, to have the biggest bank account, to do the most justice advocacy, or maybe it's just to have the perfect lawn. All right, let's take a minute and let's chat. Put your comment in the chat if you're watching online, or if you're in person, turn to the person next to you and answer this question. What ambition have you chased after? Did it provide the illumination you hoped it would? If not, why? Let's talk about it. All right, we just did an overview of Thomas Kelly's life, but let's dive back into a really specific moment. That moment at his deepest, darkest sort of intellectual embarrassment and depression. It was during this time that he had what he called an experience of the soul-shaking love of God. There he is, there's that Quaker, soul-shaking love of God, a quaking in his soul. It was like he had come home to himself because he had come home to God. All of that ambition, all of those searching after the recognition, the achievement, all of those went into the background. And what he found illuminated at the very center of his being, the light that was there, was the love of God, shaking his soul at its very core. His insecurities and his need for earthly recognition fell away, and he found his home in the light of the love of God. Finding that light, coming home to God's love, that soul-shaking love, changes even the worst of things. The worst of thing that we know in this life is death. I was talking to my father-in-law one time, my wife's dad, and his name is Bob. He told me that he was at his father's bedside when his father was in hospice. And a family friend showed up, and the two of them were talking and sharing about their own fear of death. And while they were talking, his dad, Sarah's grandfather, sort of came up out of his silence, out of his quiet that he had been in, and he said, "What's so bad about death? I'm about as close as I've ever been, and it's really not that bad." Sarah's grandfather, Grandpa Fallman, knew that soul-shaking love of God at his very center. He had come home to God. He had come home to love. This reminds me of John Wesley, who is the founder of the Methodist Renewal Movement and the Methodist Church. And his very last words were this: "The best of all is God is with us. The best of all is God is with us." Grandpa Fallman and John Wesley found their home in the light and love of God. After this soul-shaking experience of God's love, Thomas Kelly took a trip to Germany in 1938 to work and volunteer in the concentration camps. They had started in Germany as early as 1933. There he worked with other German Quakers to meet the needs of the oppressed German Quakers as well as the Jewish community, to serve them and to find God's love there in the midst of them. The suffering he experienced there pushed him deeper into God's love. And when he came back to Haverford, he was a changed man. He had a new spiritual authority. He began creating small groups of people who were gathered together to become preachers and pastors. In his sermons, he almost always ended with a gentle invitation, a gentle evangelistic invitation to surrender wholly to the one who is love, or in other words, to come home to love. I got another question for you. Have you had any kind of experience like the soul-shaking love of God that Thomas Kelly describes? Let's talk about it. Thomas Kelly wrote a collection of essays that ended up in a book called A Testament of Devotion. These were essays that he delivered while he was in Germany, serving in these different concentration camps. This collection of essays, this book, A Testament of Devotion, have had a profound impact on me. The main thesis of all of these essays is quite simple, that we can continuously and simultaneously pay attention to what is going on around us and pay attention to God at the same time. So whether you know it or not, Thomas Kelly has had a great impact on you if you're part of Sycamore Creek because of his impact on your pastor. In an essay titled The Light Within, Kelly says this: "There is a way of ordering our mental life on more than one level at once. On one level, we may be thinking, discussing, seeing, calculating, meeting all the demands of external affairs. But deep within, behind the scenes, at a profounder level, we may also be in prayer and adoration, song and worship, and a gentle receptiveness to divine breathings. If you knew that you were loved unconditionally at the deepest parts of yourself, and it was only just below the surface of perception to become conscious of that, to know it and have it be right there for you to grasp at any time, how would it change how you go through this world? How would it illuminate the world for you? How would it illuminate the world for itself? How would the people that you came in contact with experience you? And how would they experience the love of God through you? How would you naturally live out what Jesus said? You are the light of the world. Let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. I suspect that the world would change." Kelly said, "God plucks the world out of our hearts, loosening the chains of attachment, and God hurls the world into our hearts, where we and God together carry it in infinitely tender love." We gather together in worship to remember that we are unconditionally loved. We gather together in worship every week to illuminate the love at the center of our being, to illuminate God, to come home to God, to come home to that soul-shaking love that Thomas Kelly talked about. We gather together to come home to love so that others might come home to love through us, that our lives might illuminate the path towards love, to light up the path of love so that others could come home too. Madeline L'Engle, the author of A Wrinkle in Time, said this: "We draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it." Be that kind of light.